Today on Better Book Clubs, how to become a happier reader. In December of 2019, I was trying to find a couple of quick reads at the end of the year because I used to count how many books I read and I was trying to reach my goal. I pulled off of my daughter's bookshelf this book, The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. I knew it would be a pretty quick read and, maybe it would give me some good tips, and it did. But a lot of the goals I set myself as a result of reading this book to improve my personal happiness were then unachievable because of the world being shut down. So ironically, after reading The Happiness Project, some very unhappy things happened. The good news is I was already kind of tuned in to some things that Rubin suggests about awareness of your happiness and how to adjust your thinking, even if I had set some goals about doing some things that I could no longer do because of COVID-19. I would say that ultimately this book was helpful for getting me through a difficult period. But Gretchen Rubin is not the only one who writes about happiness. In fact, there's a whole industry around studying happiness, and also during the pandemic, I happened to interview a Yale psychology professor whose name is Laurie Santos. She has a free course posted on Coursera, which I'll link to below, called The Science of Well-Being, in which she teaches about the scientific underpinnings of happiness and a lot of the research that she and others have done in this field. And she also has a podcast called The Happiness Lab, which I'll also link to below. So one thing that Santos talks about in her course is learning what your personal strengths are, and then working within those strengths, but in a new way. So one of my strengths, according to what I learned from taking this mini course, is a love of learning. And so I started thinking about myself as a reader, because a lot of what I learn through reading. And then I started thinking about my happiness as a reader and some things that I might be doing that undermine my happiness as a reader. So today I want to talk about that because I think that some of the things that undermine my happiness as a reader are probably the same things that undermine your happiness as a reader, and maybe it'll help you think about some of your reading habits. So first of all, I want to be really clear. When I talk about happiness as a reader, I'm not necessarily talking about only reading happy books with happy endings. I'm talking about the things about reading that make us happy. So for example, being able to discuss what you're reading with somebody else can really make you happy. It's a pleasing experience to be able to do that. Or learning something new is a pleasing experience, or even being intellectually challenged can be a pleasing, happy experience. So those are the kinds of things we might seek out as readers that make us happy. Sometimes we're reading because somebody else told us we have to, either for school or for work. And a lot of times that doesn't make us very happy readers, but we're doing it because we have to do it. And sometimes we do that to ourselves. So I think for me anyway, the number one thing that I do to myself as a reader that makes me less happy is reading because I feel obligated. And there are several reasons I think I feel obligated to read some things. And we're talking here about reading for pleasure, not reading because something's been assigned to you. But I think we still sometimes operate under obligations. So for example, somebody gave you a book or recommended a book to you and said, you should read this. Maybe you started reading a book and you've invested an amount of time in it, you're halfway through it, and so you feel obligated to finish it. Or maybe it's just a book that you feel you should read because it would be good for you, or because lots of people have read it and you feel like you should read it too. So think about whether you're reading out of obligation. One of the notes I took when I was reading The Happiness Project says, work to be more authentically yourself rather than to be more legitimate to others. So think about the reading that you're doing because you feel it will make you more legitimate to others. So the real question here is, what will make you happy as a reader? What will make you a reader that's more authentically you? So in The Happiness Project, what Gretchen Rubin does is she sets herself a year-long project to try out what she's learned through research should help her be happier. And so every month she has a new topic that she explores. So January, boost energy. February, remember love. March, aim higher. April, lighten up, and so forth. And then she goes through her month and talks about how she tried to address these themes and what she did and what worked and what didn't work. So to give you an example, in her September chapter called Pursue a Passion, Gretchen Rubin talks about reading because reading is a passion of hers. One thing that she said was she had to allow herself to reread old books that she had read before and loved. And so it's really interesting when we have a mindset that, oh, that's bad, I should only be reading new books. And I know she's not the only one who feels that way. You may feel that way. I certainly have felt that way. I shouldn't waste my time reading a book I've already read when I could be reading something new. But is that going to make you happy? Then why shouldn't you be allowed to go back and reread a book that you really love? You could also ask yourself if it would make you happy to only be rereading books that you've read before. Probably not. So I thought about what would make me personally happier as a reader. And I came up with 4 things that I want to share with you because maybe they'll be things that could also be true of you, or maybe they'll just help you think about what would make you happier as a reader. So the first one is kind of obvious. It's just more time to read. I just started a new job, so my timing has kind of shifted, and I'm trying to think about, as I recreate my routine, where could I fit reading in? And one place I think I could fit it in bigger chunks, because I don't really feel like reading in small chunks at bedtime for 10 or 15 minutes as I'm falling asleep is really the best quality reading time. But if I could sit down for a half hour, 45 minutes, even maybe an hour right after dinner and read, I think I would really enjoy it. The interesting thing is that it's also, like Gretchen Rubin was talking about, something I feel that I need to give myself permission to do because there's always something else that needs to be done. And so reading, because it's something that I enjoy, seems like a very selfish thing to be doing when I could be paying bills and washing dishes and vacuuming the floor or doing whatever else it is that I need to do. So that's something for me to work on, is building that chunk of reading into my routine. The second thing I came up with that I think will make me happier as a reader is, again, giving myself permission to read more long-form journalism. I really enjoy long-form journalism when I read it, but what I find is I somehow have this idea that it's better to read a book than it is to read an article. And I think that comes from too many years of counting how many books I've read. If I read an article, then I'm not getting credit for reading a book. And so I would focus all my energy into reading full-length books because I was counting them. Just to give you one example, I still get the New York Times in hard copy because I like to have my paper in my hands on a Sunday morning. And I recently read this really interesting piece called The Global Dream Lab in the New York Times Magazine. This is an article that I found really interesting, but I might not have read it before because I would have thought, oh, that's going to take me 45 minutes and I should probably read a book instead. The third thing I came up with is something that I've already done or started to do that I really enjoy and I want to keep doing, and that is reading the classics with other people. So the classics are classics for a reason. They tend to be really great reads, even if we have to kind of adjust our understanding as readers in a later time. I find that the classics are really reliably great books, but it's a lot more fun if you read them with somebody else. You'll know if you follow my channel that my husband and I set up a group of friends to read Infinite Jest last winter together, and then this past fall we all read Vanity Fair together, and we have a whole series of videos on both of those books. But it's so much fun to have somebody to talk to about what you're reading. So I'm making a commitment to continue that kind of informal book club in a way that we've put together, and continue to enjoy making videos about the book we chose as well. And the fourth thing I came up with that I think is going to make me a happier reader is to seek out more humor. I think a lot of novels are really dark and grim and serious. Those may be great novels, but at a time when the world feels very weighty sometimes, I just wish there was more funny stuff to read. I know it's out there, but I have to do some work to find some more humor. Part of the problem for me is that it also has to be really well written. So I would love suggestions from you on books that you find funny, like laugh out loud funny. I'll admit Vanity Fair made me laugh out loud a number of times. One thing that Laurie Santos's research has shown though, is that it's not just enough to know something. It's not just enough to make a list of the things that you want to do to become a happier reader. You also have to take action. So when you think about what those things are for you that are going to make you a happier reader, you also have to think about what action you can take in order to make that happen. One action might be taking her course online or listening to her podcast or reading Gretchen Rubin's book. But there are also probably actions attached to your ideas about what's going to make you a happier reader. And I kind of mentioned some of those for myself as I was going through the list. So again, those are things to think about because simply making a list and thinking about it, Santos's research says, isn't going to cut it. One bit of good news is that Gretchen Rubin says that periods of deprivation can lead us to enjoy things more when we get to do them. That's good news for all of us coming through this pandemic, that the things that we've been deprived of, we're likely to appreciate and enjoy more. But that holds true for reading as well. If you've been depriving yourself of reading the kinds of things that will make you happy, when you actually start reading those things, you may find that you enjoy them and value them even more. One thing that I realized that was making me unhappy as a reader, which I just mentioned a moment ago, was counting books. So up next, my video on what happened when I stopped counting books last year. If you like what you see here, please subscribe, and I'll be back soon with another episode of Better Book Clubs.